everyone, today we're going to talk briefly about the background knowledge paper. The purpose of this paper is to gauge your background knowledge on emotional behavioral impairments. Each student's background knowledge will differ depending on where she, he, or they received their undergraduate education, what their undergraduate degree is in, and how much experience he, she, or they has had with students with emotional behavioral disorders. There's no right or wrong answers on this paper, and I don't expect you to do any research to complete it. The paper should be based off of what you already know. There's going to be no page requirement. I really don't anticipate that it's going to be more than 1.5 pages to 2 pages. There is no page requirement. You just have to complete the following required sections. So section 1, etiology. In this section, you're going to describe what you know about the causes, origins of emotional behavioral disorders. You don't have to answer these questions, but these are some of the things that you might want to think about. Is it all genetics? Is it all environmental? Is it a combination of the two? How do these two, genetics and environment, interact with each other to cause disruptive behavior disorders? Does temperament play a role, both in parent and in the child? Does the way that the parent parents play a role? Does trauma in the child or the parent play a role? Section 2, developmental course. In this section, you'll describe what you know about the developmental course of emotional behavioral disorders. You don't have to answer the following questions, but you may want to consider: at what age do symptoms or criteria first appear? How do children get diagnosed or found eligible for emotional behavioral disorders, both inside and outside of the school setting? What are the post-secondary lifelong outcomes for those who have an emotional behavioral disorder? So basically, over the course of a lifetime, what does it look like for a child who has an emotional behavioral disorder? School functioning. In this section, you're going to describe what you know about the way that students with emotional behavioral impairments function in school. Some of the questions you might want to consider: what does it look like to have a student with emotional behavioral disorder in the classroom? Do students with internalizing behaviors look different from those with externalizing behaviors? How does a student with an emotional behavioral disorder function academically? How does the student interact with their peers or other teachers? How do teachers and administrators view and treat students with emotional behavioral disorders? What types of service and accommodations do they typically need? What ones do they actually receive? Treatments and interventions. You're going to describe the treatments and interventions that are effective for students with emotional behavioral disorders. This can include both school and community treatments and interventions. Some of the questions you might want to consider: what is the function of an FBA, a BIP, or positive behavior support plan? How do school staff go about reducing the behaviors? Do the interventions work? Section 5 is going to be personal experience. You're going to describe your personal experience. These questions I do want you to answer. What classes have you taken to help prepare for working with students in emotional behavioral disorders? What were some of the main topics that you covered in those classes, and what did you learn? What experience do you have with students with emotional behavioral disorders, and what is the extent of your experience? So how long have you worked with them? Is it personal? Do you have a relative or a friend, or is it professional? Some of the requirements. It should be in APA format. I want you to have a running head, a title page, page numbers, correct level headings. You do not need an abstract for your papers. And just a couple of general reminders: even though this paper is a little bit less formal because you're talking about your experiences, don't use contractions. Don't ever use second person. It makes me want to gouge my eyes out. I tell my English kids that all the time. Using you is worse than I in any paper. But in this paper, you can use I because you're writing about your own personal experience. Don't use texting language: you, cause, through, till. And don't use dead words that are subjective. Things, a lot, very, really. At this level, at the graduate level, you should be displaying some pretty high writing skills. If you have any questions about the assignment, please feel free to email me.